The box was labeled Restricted Biological Ethics Review Board. Case File 7741-Omicron. Do not circulate. I remember reading that label 3 times before I touched the box. Not because I was afraid of it, because I was trained to treat restricted materials with a specific kind of patience, the way a surgeon scrubs before cutting. Not from superstition, but from discipline. I'd spent 11 years as an archival researcher at Denison University's Special Collections Division. I understood that the label wasn't a warning so much as a promise. Whatever was inside had been important enough to lock away. That meant it was important enough to find. The sub-level vault beneath Hargrove Library was not a glamorous place to work. 4 floors below the main reading room, it was a long concrete corridor lined with fireproof filing cabinets, temperature-controlled document drawers, and 3 sealed rooms designated for materials under active institutional review. The fluorescent lighting had a flicker on the eastern end that facilities had been promising to fix for 8 months. The ventilation smelled faintly of copper and old paper. I liked it down there. Most people didn't, which meant it was quiet. And in my line of work, quiet was the only currency that mattered. I'd been assigned to conduct a routine inventory audit of case series 7700 through 7800, a backlog that had piled up during a 2-year staffing freeze. The audit was administrative. Boring. I was supposed to catalog box contents, cross-reference with acquisition logs, flag anything misfiled or degraded, and move on. No deep reading, no analysis, just documentation. Box 7741-Omicron arrived on my cart at 9:14 in the morning on a Thursday. I know the exact time because I logged it, the way I logged everything. The box weighed less than I expected. When I cut the archival tape and lifted the lid, I found a single item inside, not a folder, not a report, not a stack of meeting minutes. A journal. Hardcover, dark green, the kind with the elastic band closure. The kind people buy when they want to feel like what they're writing matters. There was no acquisition note inside the lid. No donor information. No date of receipt. Just a small white sticker on the front cover. Handwritten in the kind of careful, compressed printing that belongs to someone who wants to be understood precisely. It said, "Read this in order. Do not skip ahead. E.V." I should have flagged it, cataloged it, and moved on. Instead, I opened it. The first line read, "By the time someone finds this, I'll already be gone. And what I became will have spread to thousands of others. I'm writing this so that at least one person will understand how it started and why I let it happen." I sat down. Above me, 4 floors up, the library was opening for the morning. Students were filing in. The espresso cart in the lobby was probably steaming. Dr. Pauline Sharp, my supervisor, was likely at her desk with her second coffee and her reading glasses. The world was operating normally. I read the second line. "Today is March 3rd. You have approximately 72 hours before the first public case is confirmed. I'm sorry there isn't more time." I checked the date at the top of the entry. It had been written 14 months ago. Then I checked my phone. It was March 3rd. I sat with that coincidence for exactly 40 seconds before I decided it wasn't a coincidence. I want to be precise about that because the 40 seconds matters. In that window, I ran through every rational explanation. I was misreading the date. The journal had been misdated by the author. The March 3rd reference was coincidental, a recurring date chosen for structural reasons, like a chapter heading, not a literal calendar marker. I was pattern matching the way humans always do when they want something mundane to mean something. I pulled out my catalog sheet and wrote, "Journal, handwritten, single volume, author unidentified, initials E.V. Condition, good." Contents: personal narrative, possibly speculative or fiction. I capped my pen. I put the catalog sheet down. And then I picked the journal back up and kept reading. The author's name, I learned by the third page, was Evelyn Voss. She had been a postdoctoral researcher in the university's molecular biology department, specifically working under a federally funded grant studying mutagenic response in accelerated prion protein folding. I didn't understand the science of that. I still don't, not fully. But I understood enough. She had been working on something that changed how proteins misfold in the brain. And somewhere in that work, something had gone wrong. The journal wasn't written in the frantic shorthand I might have expected from someone who believed they were about to become the origin point of a catastrophe. It was composed, methodical. She wrote the way someone writes when they've already grieved the thing they're about to say and have arrived on the other side of grief, at something colder and more deliberate. Which I came to understand was exactly what had happened. Evelyn Voss had been infected 6 weeks before she wrote the first entry. Not accidentally. She knew this. She'd been monitoring her own neurological changes with the kind of self-documentation that required a particular kind of courage or a particular kind of detachment that I'm not sure I have a clean word for. She was tracking what was happening to her because she was still a scientist, even as she was becoming something else. And she was writing this journal because she was still, barely, a person. I set the journal on the desk and walked to the vault door. I opened it, stepped into the corridor, and stood under the flickering eastern light for a moment. I had a decision to make, and I wanted to make it clearly, outside the gravity of the room. The rational action was to bring the journal to Pauline. Let institutional procedure take over. Campus security, perhaps. A call to whoever oversaw biological research compliance. The journal would go into a chain of custody, and I would go back to my audit. The problem was the date, and the line about 72 hours. If this was fiction, I was wasting time worrying. If this wasn't fiction, I was wasting time doing anything other than reading. I went back inside and kept reading. By page 12, Evelyn had described the first 3 symptoms of what she called the transition phase. Not with horror, but with the precision of someone filing a lab report. Sensitivity to low-frequency sound. Loss of appetite followed by a different kind of hunger she couldn't yet name. And a change in how she perceived faces. She wrote, "I look at people now, and I see them the way a language I don't speak sounds. I know it means something, but the meaning has stopped reaching me. I'm watching their faces from the other side of a window I didn't realize was there." That line stopped me. Not because it was frightening, though it was. Because it was the saddest thing I'd ever read. And I've spent 11 years reading things that other people decided were important enough to preserve. Pauline came down to check on my progress at 11:30. I heard her heels on the stairwell before she reached the vault level. She had a deliberate walk, the kind that announced itself. She knocked on the open door frame and leaned in with her coffee, still on the first cup by the look of it, which meant she'd had a difficult morning. "You're ahead of schedule," she said, glancing at my cart. Then she looked at me. "You're not ahead of schedule." Pauline Sharp had been running special collections for 19 years. She was 61, precise, and had the professional disposition of someone who had spent decades deciding what was worth saving. She was not a warm person in the way people use that word. She was something better. She was consistent. You always knew where you stood with Pauline. "I found something in the 7741 box," I said. She came in, set her coffee on the edge of the work table, and picked up the journal. She read the cover sticker, turned it over, looked at the spine, then opened to the first page. She read the first entry. Then she closed it and set it down with the same careful neutrality she applied to everything. "What's your interpretation?" she asked. "I think it's real," I said. "You think a researcher left a journal predicting the origin of a pandemic inside a sealed evidence box in our sub-level vault dated 14 months ago, and that pandemic is beginning today. I know how that sounds." "It sounds like it belongs in the speculative fiction section," she said. But she hadn't moved to take it away, and she was still in the room. With Pauline, those were meaningful signals. "The author is named Evelyn Voss," I said. "She was in molecular biology. I looked her up on my phone while you were on the stairs. Her faculty page was taken down 8 months ago. There's no record of her leaving, no record of a forwarding address, no obituary. She was just removed from the record." Pauline was quiet for a moment. "People leave academic positions for many reasons." "Yes," I said. "They do." She picked up the journal again. This time she read further 3 pages. 4. I watched her face, which was what I always did when I needed to know if something was worth taking seriously. Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened slightly on the spine. "How far have you read?" she asked without looking up. "To page 22. "And what does she say is coming?" I told her. Not everything, I didn't have everything yet. But I told her what Evelyn Voss had described in those first 22 pages. A prion-based neurological cascade, airborne capable under specific atmospheric conditions, incubation period of 5 to 8 days, and a transition point after which, as Evelyn put it, the self becomes a passenger in a body that has found a simpler directive. Pauline set the journal down. She picked up her coffee. She took 1 sip and put it back down. "Lock the vault," she said. "Both of us read. We don't leave until we've read everything." That was Pauline. Not panic, not dismissal. Just the understanding that when the primary source is in front of you, you read the primary source. We pulled up 2 chairs, and we read. Evelyn Voss had known for 4 years before she wrote a single word of the journal. That was the part that took time to accept. Not the science, I could hold the science at arm's length and process it as information. But the 4 years. The idea that a person could carry something like that, alone, for 4 years, and still go to work every morning, still teach seminars, still write grant reports, and attend faculty meetings, and eat lunch in the departmental break room, and smile at colleagues in the hallway, that was harder. She explained it in entries 7 through 11, which covered the period she called the discovery window. Her research team, 3 postdocs, and a principal investigator named Dr. Marcus Fell, had been working on accelerated prion folding as a mechanism for treating neurodegenerative disease. The hypothesis was elegant. If you could control the rate of misfolding, you could potentially use it as a therapeutic tool. A way to clear damaged protein clusters before they cascaded. The early results had been promising enough to secure a second federal grant cycle. The problem had emerged in a secondary experiment that wasn't part of the original grant scope. Evelyn had been running parallel tests on atmospheric transmission vectors. Background work, she called it, exploratory rather than directive. And she had discovered, using a modified aerosol chamber and a set of tissue samples that weren't supposed to be in that particular experiment, that the prion variant they'd developed didn't just fold, it transmitted. Under specific temperature and humidity conditions that matched, almost exactly, the seasonal profile of late winter in the northeastern United States, the variant became airborne. She'd reported it to Dr. Fell immediately. Dr. Fell had told her to delete the data and not document the experiment. She'd spent 2 weeks trying to understand if he was wrong. She wasn't. She spent 2 more weeks trying to understand if he was corrupt or afraid or simply making the kind of pragmatic calculation that research administrators sometimes make when a result threatens a program they've spent a decade building. She never landed on a clean answer. She wrote, "Marcus isn't a villain. That's what makes this so difficult. He's a person who decided that the probability of harm was manageable and that the cost of disclosure was not. I've decided the same thing in the same way about different things in other parts of my life. I understand how he got there. That doesn't change where it leads." She'd stayed. She'd kept working. She'd told herself she was staying to monitor, to track, to ensure the variant never left containment. For 4 years, she had served as the only person in the building who knew what was actually in the lab, and who had made herself responsible for making sure it stayed there. Then, 6 weeks before she wrote the journal, there had been an equipment failure. Pauline and I read that section in silence. The fluorescent light on the eastern end of the corridor flickered twice. Neither of us mentioned it. The equipment failure took 3 entries to describe, because Evelyn was precise and precision takes space. The short version: a temperature regulation malfunction in a secondary containment unit had allowed the aerosol chamber to cycle through the exact atmospheric conditions she'd identified as the transmission threshold. The exposure had been brief, less than 4 minutes. The building's ventilation system had been in a scheduled maintenance mode that reduced filtration efficiency by 40%, and Evelyn had been in the lab alone because she'd stayed late, as she often did, because she was the one who stayed. She wrote, "I didn't feel anything that night. I went home. I made dinner. I called my sister in Portland. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, which is the kind of conversation I've been treasuring lately because I understand now that nothing important is actually the most important thing. I went to sleep. 3 days later, I began to notice the sounds. The sensitivity to low-frequency sound had been the first marker the same symptoms she'd observed in the tissue samples, now unfolding in her own nervous system with a fidelity that she described as both horrifying and scientifically clarifying. She could hear the building's HVAC system the way she'd previously heard music. She could hear footsteps 2 floors above her. She could hear, she wrote, the specific silence of a room that has recently been occupied by someone who is afraid. She documented every change. Every day for 6 weeks, she had written down what was happening to her with the same discipline she would have applied to any research subject. And alongside that documentation, she had been building something else. A picture of how the transmission would spread, based on her knowledge of the variant's behavior and her knowledge of the university's ventilation network, the city's wind patterns, the population density of the campus neighborhood, and the incubation period she was experiencing firsthand. Her calculations, written in the back of the journal in a small, compressed hand, suggested that the event she called first public visibility would occur between 71 and 74 hours after March 3rd. The day I'd found the box. I'd found the box at 9:14 in the morning. Pauline looked up from the journal. She mapped a transmission curve, she said. Based on her own symptoms as calibration data, I said. That's extraordinary scientific discipline, Pauline said. Then, after a pause, she knew she wasn't going to recover. She knew before she finished the first entry, I said. Pauline stood up, walked to the far end of the work table, and stood with her back to me for a moment. When she turned around, her face had done something I hadn't seen it do in 11 years of working under her. It had dropped the institutional layer. What was underneath was not panic. It was grief, moving fast. "Who else has access to this vault?" she asked. "No active access codes besides ours," I said. "Maintenance has a master key. Campus security has a master key." "How did the box get here?" I'd been thinking about that since page 3. Someone put it in the acquisition system as a standard intake. The metadata shows it was logged by a staff account that was deactivated 14 months ago. Pauline didn't ask whose account. I think she already knew that the answer would be Evelyn Voss, that Evelyn had used her own access. Before she lost the ability to make sure the box ended up exactly where someone like me would eventually find it. In a restricted queue, waiting for an audit that had been delayed by a staffing freeze. Timed, somehow not perfectly, but close enough to land on the right desk at approximately the right moment. She planned this, Pauline said. She planned this, I confirmed. There were still 41 pages left in the journal. We read faster. In entries 19 through 27, Evelyn described what she called the narrowing, the progressive loss of the cognitive frameworks she associated with her sense of self. She wrote about it the way a person describes watching snow accumulate, quietly, steadily, without drama, and with the specific sorrow of knowing that the landscape will look different in the morning and you won't be able to clearly remember what it looked like before. She was still herself when she wrote those entries. But she was writing from a position she described as standing at the edge of myself, looking back. She could feel the variance effects on her prefrontal processing not as pain, but as a kind of narrowing of interest. Things that had mattered to her were becoming less textured. Concerns that had once carried emotional weight were flattening. She wrote, "I notice I care less about whether people like me. This would be freeing under other circumstances. Under these ones, it reads as a symptom." What she retained, she noted with something close to dark humor, was her professional interest. The scientist in her remained engaged in what was happening. She theorized that the prion cascade, in its early stages, left intact the most deeply reinforced cognitive networks, the ones built by decades of repetition. Her scientific methodology was so deeply embedded that it survived longer than her personal attachments, which was why she could still write precisely about what was happening to her, even as her capacity to feel afraid of it was diminishing. The last entry she'd written while fully certain of her identity was entry 28. She began it. "I want to record something while I still can, which is that I was a person who loved specific things, libraries, the smell of rain on concrete, the particular blue of late afternoon in November. My sister's laugh. The way a good research question feels when you've just landed on it, like a key turning in a lock you didn't know was there. I am telling you these things, not because they'll help you understand the outbreak. They won't. I'm telling you because I was here, and I was whole, and that should be documented by someone. It might as well be me." I stopped reading after that entry. Not because the journal ended, it didn't. The entries continued for 13 more pages, in a handwriting that became progressively less composed, the syntax loosening, the paragraphs shortening. But I needed a moment before I could read what came after. Pauline, who had been reading parallel to me across the table, also stopped. She removed her glasses and pressed the tips of her fingers against her closed eyes. The vault was very quiet. "She was alone in this," I said. "Yes," Pauline said. "For 4 years, she carried this alone." "Yes." I thought about the 40 minutes Evelyn had spent on the phone with her sister in Portland the night of the exposure, talking about nothing important, already knowing on some level, even then, that she was saying goodbye. And her sister had no idea. Her sister thought it was just a Thursday. It was 2:17 in the afternoon when we finished the journal. The last legible entry, the final one Evelyn had written before the handwriting became something other than language, said only, "It's better than I expected. There's less fear at the end than I thought there would be. I think I understand why now. The fear is the last thing to go. Below it, there were 4 lines of marks that might have been an attempt at words, or might not have been. Pauline closed the journal. She placed it on the table between us, and we sat in the kind of silence that follows something you cannot unhear. Then my phone buzzed. It was a campus-wide notification from the University Health Center. Multiple students presenting with flu-like symptoms. Health center at capacity. Students advised to seek off-campus urgent care for non-emergency concerns. The timestamp was 2:09 p.m. I turned the phone so Pauline could see it. She looked at it for 3 seconds. The incubation period, she said. 5 to 8 days, I said. The equipment failure was 6 weeks ago, but the transmission window, Evelyn's model, puts initial public spread starting about a week ago. I pulled up the calendar on my phone. 8 days back from today placed us at February 23rd. What was the weather on February 23rd? Pauline already had her phone out. She was checking the historical forecast. 31 degrees, 47% humidity, light northwest wind. She looked at me. Those are her threshold numbers. Almost exactly, I said. So it's already spreading. Has been. What we're seeing on campus right now is the leading edge of the incubation curve resolving. By tonight, it's visible, Pauline finished. We had, by Evelyn's projection, somewhere between 55 and 60 hours before what she called first public visibility became public collapse, the point at which the number of active cases exceeded the capacity of any organized response to manage them individually. After that, the response dynamic shifts. You stop treating people and start managing populations. I'd spent 11 years working with historical documents. I'd read accounts of the 1918 flu, of cholera outbreaks in 19th century cities, of the early months of HIV before anyone had a name for it. I understood, in an abstract way, what population-level infectious disease looked like from the inside of the timeline. I had read those documents in climate-controlled rooms, with the calm distance of analysis. Sitting in that vault, I understood for the first time what it had felt like to be the person writing them. We need to make some decisions, Pauline said. Yes, I said. And we need to make them in the next 10 minutes, because after that, we're either acting on them or we've already decided not to. That was Pauline. Even now, structure. I found it steadying in a way I couldn't fully account for. The first decision was the journal itself. Evelyn had anticipated this, which I should have expected. In entry 31, one of the last entries with clear syntax, she had written directly to whoever found the document. You're going to want to use this. You're going to think that the transmission curve, the symptom progression, the atmospheric thresholds, that these are the valuable things and that you should get them to someone who can act on them. You're not wrong, but you need to know something before you make that decision. Releasing this journal publicly will trigger a response. The response will be fear. Fear at this scale has its own transmission dynamics, and they're faster than the variant. Before the biology does what I've calculated, the fear will do something I can't calculate, and that unknown is the most dangerous element in the system. I am not telling you to burn it. I'm telling you that the choice is not between release and silence. It's between 2 different kinds of catastrophe. And the only person who can decide which catastrophe does less harm is the person holding this right now. I'm sorry that's you. I would have chosen differently if I could have. Pauline and I had read that passage at the same time, and neither of us had spoken about it until now. She's right, Pauline said. If we take that journal to anyone with broadcast capacity, we light a different kind of fire. If we don't take it to anyone, the information in it, the symptom markers, the transmission conditions, the progression timeline stays here, I said. There's a middle path, Pauline said. The data, not the story. We extract the clinical information and get it to someone in public health infrastructure who can use it without triggering a public narrative. That requires trusting someone in public health infrastructure, I said. Do you know anyone? I thought about it. Dr. Amir Chandrasekaran. He's an epidemiology consultant with the State Health Department. He did a seminar here 2 years ago. I helped him pull background materials from the collection. He's serious, and he's the kind of person who would know what to do with information that couldn't have a clear sourcing chain. You trust him? I trust his judgment, I said. That's not the same thing, but it's enough. Pauline nodded. Call him. I hesitated. The other option, I said carefully, is the final entry. Pauline looked at me. I had not told her yet about the final readable entry, not the last one, Evelyn wrote, but the one she had marked with a small paper tab folded into the page, labeled in that careful compressed printing, read this last. It was not the last page of the journal. It was page 47 of 61. Evelyn had placed it deliberately out of sequence, which was why we hadn't reached it in our linear read. I'd found the tab when I'd been checking the page count. While Pauline was reading, I'd read it. I hadn't told Pauline yet what it said. She was watching me now with the expression she used when she suspected someone was managing information. What does it say? She asked. I picked up the journal. I found the tabbed page. I read it aloud. In the secondary containment unit cabinet 4, drawer 7, labeled Reagent Series F, there is a sealed vial. The compound inside will not reverse the transition in those already affected, but administered to exposed pre-symptomatic individuals, it significantly reduces the probability of full cascade. I developed it in the last 3 weeks. I don't know if it works. I was not able to test it. The lab is on the 3rd floor of Barker Hall. My keycard is in the back pocket of this journal's rear cover. The card expires in 48 hours from March 3rd. That window was not an accident. I reached into the journal's back pocket. The keycard was there. Pauline stared at it for a long moment. She built us a choice, I said. Yes, Pauline said quietly. And a clock. The walk from Hargrove Library to Barker Hall was 7 minutes under normal conditions. I know because I timed it once, years ago, when I was pulling a set of materials that molecular biology had requested. 7 minutes of open quad, 2 sets of card access doors, and a service elevator that worked when it felt like it. Under the conditions we were walking into early evening, the campus starting to show the first visible signs of what was coming. It felt both shorter and much longer than 7 minutes. The health center notifications had continued while we prepared to leave. 2 more alerts, each one slightly more specific than the last. The language had shifted from flu-like symptoms to neurological symptoms, including heightened auditory sensitivity and disorientation. That phrase, heightened auditory sensitivity, had made Pauline go very still when she read it. That's Evelyn's first marker, she said. I know, I said, which means the earliest cases on campus have been incubating for at least 5 days, I said, which means exposure happened before February 27th at the latest. We didn't say what that meant. We already knew. The transmission had begun earlier than Evelyn's conservative estimate, which meant the curve was steeper, which meant the window was shorter. We left the vault at 4:43 p.m. Pauline had her coat. I had the journal in my bag and the key card in my jacket pocket. We'd agreed that we would go to Barker Hall first, locate the vial, and then, depending on what we found, contact Amir Chandrasekaran. The quad was not empty, but it was quieter than a Tuesday evening in March should have been. The kind of quiet that accumulates when people have been watching the same news alert reload on their phones all afternoon and have started, without quite deciding to, staying in. A group of undergraduates crossed ahead of us, walking quickly and close together. One of them had her hands pressed over her ears. I watched that and kept walking. At the entrance to Barker Hall, a security guard I half recognized from faculty access briefings was standing just inside the glass doors. His name tag said Peterson. He looked at us the way people look at things they've been told to be cautious about. "Buildings on reduced access," he said. "Admin hold." "We have an active research clearance," Pauline said, with the particular administrative certainty that 19 years of institutional authority will build in a person. She showed her faculty card. I showed mine. Peterson looked at the cards, looked at us, and made the calculation that whatever we were doing probably wasn't his problem. "Third floor elevators out," he said, stepping aside. "Use the stairs." We went up. The third floor of Barker Hall smelled wrong. I noticed it before I could name it something chemical beneath a standard lab corridor smell, something sharp and slightly sweet that didn't belong. Pauline noticed it too. I could tell by the way she paused at the top of the stairwell landing just for a beat before continuing. The corridor was empty. The labs on the third floor were primarily graduate research spaces, and at this hour, most of them would be unoccupied anyway. But the specific silence of these particular rooms had the quality I'd read about in Evelyn's journal, the silence of spaces that had recently held fear. Evelyn's lab was the third door on the right. The placard beside it read, "Molecular Biology /Voss Research Group." No indication that either name had been removed. Either the department hadn't gotten to updating it, or someone had decided that erasure was its own kind of notice. The keycard worked. The lab was larger than I'd pictured from Evelyn's descriptions. 2 long bench rows, a bank of equipment I couldn't name. Several large units against the far wall that I recognized from her descriptions as the containment cabinets. The space was clean. Someone had continued working in it, or someone had cleaned it up with methodical intention. Cabinet 4 was on the left wall, taller than the others. Drawer 7 was at mid-height. Inside, behind a row of labeled reagent containers, was a smaller sealed rack. And inside the rack was a single vial glass, sealed with wax over the stopper, no label except a strip of white tape on which Evelyn had written, in that same precise hand, "If it works, you'll know. If it doesn't, I'm sorry." I stood there looking at it. The vial contained a liquid so pale it was nearly clear. There was no way to verify what it was, no way to test it, no way to know if Evelyn's frantic final weeks of solo development had produced something real or something she'd needed to believe was real in order to bear what she was becoming. "We can't test it," I said. "No," Pauline said. "We don't know who's been exposed." Based on the timeline, anyone who was on campus between February 20th and February 27th in the right atmospheric conditions could be pre-symptomatic right now. "That's several thousand people," I said. "Yes." I turned the vial over in my fingers. Evelyn said it couldn't reverse the transition in those already affected, but for pre-symptomatic, a compound that reduces cascade probability, Pauline said carefully, administered to several thousand people, without clinical validation, without dosing information, without any controlled evidence. "She was in a containment lab," I said. "There's a reason she had access to this equipment and these materials. She wasn't working randomly. She was also a person in the early stages of neurological alteration who was self-experimenting in isolation, Pauline said. And her voice was not cruel about it. It was careful. It was the voice she used when she was protecting me from a conclusion I was moving toward too quickly. I set the vial down on the bench. I looked at it. I thought about Evelyn at this bench, in the weeks after the exposure, still precise, still disciplined, still running tests while simultaneously monitoring her own diminishing self. Writing it all down, planning the timing of the discovery, leaving the key card, leaving the note, building a machine for someone else to operate after she was gone. She believed it worked, I said. I know, Pauline said. The question isn't what she believed, I said. The question is what we believe about what she was capable of, and whether that's enough to act on. Dr. Marcus Fell was in the lab. I hadn't seen him when we entered because he was in the far corner, behind the largest containment unit, and the overhead light above him had burned out. I became aware of him because of the sound, a low, rhythmic sound that I processed first as equipment noise, then as breathing, and then as something I didn't want to name. He was standing facing the wall. He was tall, I knew from his faculty photo that he was in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, the kind of academic who had been athletic once and retained the frame. Right now, he was standing with both hands flat against the wall, his head slightly lowered, breathing in that slow, deliberate rhythm that Evelyn had described in Entry 16 as the regulation phase, the brain attempting to manage its own signal traffic by slowing voluntary input. Pauline put her hand on my arm. Fell hadn't turned around. He might not have heard us come in, or he might not have cared. Evelyn had written about that too, the late-stage indifference to social cues that preceded the loss of the self's organizing function. I looked at him, and I thought about what Evelyn had written about him. Marcus isn't a villain. She'd had 4 years to be angry at him. And she'd arrived at that sentence instead. I wasn't sure I was as generous, standing in the room with him now, holding the vial she'd made. But I also wasn't sure my judgment of him was the relevant thing. Dr. Fell, I said quietly. He turned. His eyes were wrong, not absent. That was the thing that made it harder than I expected. His eyes weren't blank. There was still something in them, something that tracked my face and recognized it as a face. Something that understood the address was directed at him. He was still there. He was just further back than he should have been, like a person standing at the very end of a long hallway. He looked at me, then at Pauline, then at the vial in my hand. She finished it, he said. His voice was flat, not hostile, not emotional, just reduced to its functional minimum. She left it here for us to find, I said. She told me she was working on something, he said. In the last weeks, I didn't stop her. He paused. I don't know what that was. I looked at him, and I understood, in a way that landed with specific weight, that this was the version of Marcus Fell that Evelyn had known. Not a monster. A man who had made a calculation that was catastrophically wrong, and who was now standing on the other side of it, watching the result, still unable to fully process the distance between what he'd decided and what had happened. And that inability to process whether it was the variant or simply human psychology had left him here in the dark in his own lab, pressing his hands against the wall. How far along are you? I asked. He thought about it. The sound sensitivity has been present for 4 days, he said. The face recognition issue started this morning. 4 days of symptoms meant exposure approximately a week before that, which placed his transmission date in roughly the same window as the broader campus spread. which meant Fell hadn't been infected by Evelyn directly. He'd been caught in the same atmospheric transmission event as everyone else. He'd been undone by the same cascade he'd helped create. I don't know what Evelyn would have felt about that. I held the vial, and I thought about the questions she'd built into this moment, not just whether the compound worked, but who deserved to find out. I made the call to Amir Chandrasekaran from the lab, while Pauline stayed with Fell. Amir picked up on the second ring. He was a precise person, like Pauline, the kind of person who answers calls the same way regardless of the hour or the circumstances, because the precision is the habit, and the habit is the armor. I heard background noise when he answered. Traffic, voices, the specific audio of a building that was operating above its usual capacity. I need 15 uninterrupted minutes, I said. I have 10, he said. Start. I started. I gave him the clinical information first, the transmission thresholds, the symptom sequence, the incubation data, the atmospheric conditions, the cascade mechanism, as Evelyn had described it. I kept Evelyn's name out of it. I said a researcher and internal documentation. He didn't ask for sourcing. He was writing. I could hear the scratch of a pen. When I finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. The auditory sensitivity cases at Denison University, he said. Yes. We've had 17 similar presentations at 3 urgent care facilities in the surrounding municipality in the last 6 hours, he said. I've been on a call with the state epidemiology office for most of the afternoon. Then you're all ready? We're behind, he said flatly. We don't have a transmission mechanism. We don't have a source. We've been treating it as an atypical influenza cluster. He paused. What you've just told me changes the response framework significantly. I know. Can you document this? Formally? The sourcing? Not immediately, I said. There are reasons. I can get you more of the primary material, but I need some time to determine what releasing it fully will. I don't have time, he said. And from what you're describing, neither do you. He was right. I knew he was right. But I also had the journal in my bag, and Evelyn's paragraph about the fear transmission was sitting in my chest like a stone. And I was trying to be the person she'd written that paragraph to. Give me until tomorrow morning, I said. He exhaled. Okay. But if I pull another cluster report tonight that matches this profile, I'll call you before that happens, I said. I ended the call and looked at the vial on the bench. Behind me, I heard Pauline say something quiet to Fell. I heard Fell's voice in response low, measured, increasingly far away. The vial had no dosing information. There was no syringe, no applicator, no delivery mechanism visible in the lab. Evelyn had left the compound without leaving the instructions for using it, which was either an oversight or a statement. I spent 3 minutes checking the drawers around cabinet 4 and found, in drawer 8, a sealed packet of sterile micro-dosing pipettes and a folded sheet of paper on which Evelyn had written, in her smallest hand, 0.2 milliliters, oral administration, single dose. Effective window, pre-symptom onset or within 24 hours of first marker. Beyond that window, unknown. Not an oversight then. She'd thought of everything, right to the end of her capacity to think. Fell asked about the vial. He didn't frame it as a request. He looked at the bench where I'd set it, and then he looked at me. And the question was entirely in his eyes, or whatever remained in his eyes, that was still capable of forming a question. She said it doesn't work for people already in transition, I said. I know, he said. She told me. The last time we spoke, she told me she was working on something for the pre-symptomatic window, She thought she could interrupt the cascade before the Phase 2 protein folding began. He paused. She said it didn't help her. She self-administered, I said. Yes, 2 weeks ago. By then she was past the window. Something moved across his face, not quite grief, because I think grief requires a completeness of self that he was losing access to. It was more like the residue of grief, the outline of something that had been there. She kept working anyway, he said. Even after she knew it wouldn't help her, she kept developing it. For whoever found the journal, I said. For whoever found the journal, he agreed. I picked up the vial. I looked at it. Then I looked at Fel. Your first symptom was 4 days ago, I said. Yes. Evelyn's note says the effective window is within 24 hours of first marker onset. I know. That window is closed for you, I said. Yes, he said. I know that too. We looked at each other. He was still there, still present enough to understand this conversation, to follow its logic, to know what it meant and what it didn't mean. And I was standing there where the Evelyn Voss had spent her final weeks of functional consciousness developing, holding it in my hand, in the same room as the man whose decision had set all of this in motion. Pauline was watching me, not directing me, watching. I thought about what Evelyn had said about the choice. 2 kinds of catastrophe, no clean option, just the best available judgment of the person holding the thing. I thought about Amir's voice on the phone. 17 cases in 6 hours, the framework shifting, the response mobilizing. I thought about the thousands of people who might be in the pre-symptomatic window right now, walking around campus, going home, making dinner, calling their sisters about nothing important. We need to get this to Amir tonight, I said to Pauline. Yes, she said. Not tomorrow morning, tonight. Yes, she said again. I looked at Fel one more time. He had turned back toward the wall. I don't know if that was choice or symptom. I'm not sure the distinction was meaningful anymore. We left him there and we walked out. The walk back across campus was 17 minutes, not because the distance had changed, because the campus had. By the time Pauline and I reached the quad, the health center had a line outside its doors. Not a long line, not a panicked one, just people waiting. Some of them sitting on the low stone wall along the building's south face, some of them on phones, some of them just standing with their hands at their sides in the particular stillness of people who aren't sure what they're waiting for. Pauline and I did not slow down. We didn't want to be recognizable as people who knew something. That particular kind of visible knowledge, in a crowd on the edge of understanding what it's afraid of, is a different kind of contagion. But I looked, because I couldn't not look. And what I saw was ordinary. Tired faces, worried faces, people whose hearing was giving them trouble and who thought it was a bug, a pressure change, something that would resolve. People who had been here on campus 2 weeks ago in the cold northwestern wind and hadn't known that the wind mattered. I looked at them, and I thought about Evelyn at her bench, running the atmospheric models, calculating the density curves, understanding that these people would end up here and not having a way to stop it. She'd had one way. She'd taken it. I had the vial in my jacket pocket. Pauline had the journal in her bag. We'd agreed, walking out of Barker Hall, that the journal went to Amir with the clinical data not publicly, not through channels that would create a narrative before the response infrastructure was ready to absorb it. We'd agreed that the compound went to Amir for preliminary analysis, that the decision about deployment went to people with the institutional capacity to make it responsibly. We'd agreed on all of that. And I believed it was right. What I hadn't said to Pauline and what I was holding alongside everything else as we crossed the quad was the question Evelyn had left in that middle of the journal entry. The one she'd marked red this last. She hadn't just left us a key card and a vial and a transmission model. She'd left us the final unread entry, the one I'd reached before Pauline had, the one I hadn't read aloud in full. I had told Pauline it said, "There is a vial. Go get it." That was true. That was in the entry. What I hadn't read aloud was the last paragraph. I have to be honest with you about something. I don't know if what I made is a treatment. It might be. The in vitro results suggested cascade suppression. But in vitro results in a system like this have very limited predictive power. And I was working alone, without peer review, without a second set of eyes, without the kind of checks that turn a result into a finding. I put it there because I needed there to be something useful at the end of this. I needed to believe that what I was doing in these last weeks amounted to something beyond documentation. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. I am telling you this because you deserve the full truth when you're making the decision. And because even now I'm still a scientist. Even now, I can't make a claim I haven't earned. I walked across the quad with that paragraph in my chest. It didn't change what we were doing. We were still taking the vial to Amir. We were still making the call. But it changed what the vial was. It changed the weight of it. Evelyn had built us a hope. She hadn't promised it was a cure. There is a difference between those two things, and I think she understood that difference better than almost anyone alive. I thought about burning the journal. I thought about it the way you think about not pressing a button. The specific awareness of the option making the option feel more real than it actually is. I wasn't going to burn it. I knew I wasn't going to burn it. But I thought about it. Because Evelyn had told me to think about it. Because she had written, "I'm not telling you to burn it," which meant she'd thought about it. Which meant she'd understood why someone might. Pauline and I reached the edge of campus at 6:28 p.m. The first official announcement, not from the university, but from the city health department, came through on my phone at 6:31 p.m. Residents experiencing auditory sensitivity, disorientation, or unusual fatigue are advised to contact the health department information line. 17 minutes later, the line was overwhelmed. We were already in Amir's office by then. I had placed the vial on his desk. Pauline had placed the journal. Not the original. We kept the original. But a photographed and transcribed copy of the clinical sections beside it. Amir was on 2 phones simultaneously, which I'd seen him do once before in that seminar, when someone had called with a question that another call needed to hear. He was a man built for the convergence of crises. He saw the vial and he saw the journal, and he looked at us with an expression that was not surprise, and not relief, and not gratitude, but something that combined elements of all three into something more complex and less clean. He held up one finger one moment and finished both calls. Then he looked at us. "Tell me about the compound," he said. I told him everything Evelyn had written, including the last paragraph. The full truth, all of it. He listened without interrupting. Then he picked up the vial and looked at it for a long time. "She wasn't certain," he said. "No," I said. "But she built it anyway." "Yes," I said. He set the vial back down. He looked at the journal. He looked at us. Then he made a call that lasted 40 seconds, and what he said was, "I need a preliminary analysis team at my office inside the hour. I need the state lab on standby. And I need someone to locate anyone who worked with Evelyn Voss in the last 18 months. The machine began. I go back to the vault sometimes. Not for work, I'm on administrative leave while the institutional review runs its course. I go because it's the only place that makes sense to me now, in the months that have followed. 4 floors down, flickering eastern light, smell of copper and old paper. The outbreak was not contained. I want to be honest about that. Amir's response team, the state protocols, the eventual federal involvement, they managed it, shaped it, slowed it. The compound Evelyn made showed partial efficacy in preliminary analysis and was fast-tracked into a controlled trial that is still running as I write this. Whether it becomes a treatment depends on results I don't yet have. I check the updates when they come in, the way I used to check acquisition logs, one data point at a time. Evelyn's name is in the record now. Her faculty page is restored. There is a formal case study in process that will credit her work, all of it, including the parts that are difficult to credit. Marcus Fell is in a specialized care facility. He is still present, the last I heard. Still there at the end of that long hallway. I think about Evelyn's sister in Portland, who didn't know that a Thursday phone call was a goodbye. I hope someone has spoken to her by now. I hope the 40 minutes about nothing important are something she can hold on to rather than a wound. What I understand now, what I couldn't have understood before the vault, before the journal, before Barker Hall and the vial and the walk across the changing campus, is that the archive is not where things go to be forgotten. It's where they go to wait. Everything filed away in those sub-level rooms was put there by someone who believed, on some level, that the right reader would eventually arrive, that the timing would resolve, that the key would find the lock. Evelyn Voss believed that too. She was not wrong.